Albert Breer, you have a very high bar previously set for this one. You were watching that too, weren't you, Albert? You were watching that.
Rich, you're having the color guy from the hot dog eating contest on. I was a little confused when I was watching it on Saturday. Does that mean that he actually is a former competitor, the way that ex-football players or ex-basketball players are the color analysts for those sports? Is that the way it works?
Albert, I got to be honest with you. I'm coming into this with a clean sheet. I have no earthly idea what his bona fides
it's a great question.
To analyze the hot dog eating contest is, or if he really knows what the Jordan Spieth of tubed beef would look like. I don't know, Albert. I just don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what. He made it sound like I don't know. I mean, like this was Rocky Drago. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I gotta give him credit. I mean, you gotta give everybody involved credit. They make this thing out to be a very, very big deal. I actually learned while I was watching that the guy in the hat, who's the Don King of the event or whatever,
George Shea, yeah,
he's also the commissioner, right?
I think so, which means
I think that's right.
Which means DeMaurice Smith is trying to get him ejected from being able to be the commissioner as well as the adjudicator
right.
of the event, right, Albert?
Well, I mean, I can give you. You got to give all these guys credit. All of these guys, they really are all in. They're all into that.
Yeah. So Rich Shea, who's calling in, is George's brother. So I think that might be his way of getting into the announcer seat. All right, Albert, joining me here on Albert Breer joining me here on the program. July 4th, the most serious story of the weekend. Clearly, Jason Pierre-Paul having a firecracker, from what it seems, go off in his hand. What can you tell us about Jason Pierre-Paul's status as it currently stands?
Well, the Giants right now, their priority is on JPP's well-being. That said, they're doing their due diligence, and there was an offer on the table. It's not on the table anymore. And I think it's pretty obvious that the leverage is swung back over. If you're talking about the contract situation here, where he has a $15 million franchise tender, and the Giants now, if this were to cost JPP a game, 5 games, 10 games, have the option to put him on the non-football injury list, which means they wouldn't have to pay him while he's out. And so, from a contractual standpoint, when you're talking about the contract situation with JPP being an unsigned franchise player, the Giants retain his rights, and they have leverage now, because if this does cost him games, then they don't have to pay him for that. Now, that said, I know that there are bigger concerns here, and it's not career-threatening. It doesn't sound like it's going to be season-threatening. But I would say this, those two words, when these two words come into play, and that's nerve damage, I think there's cause for concern. And, that's what they're looking at right now, is whether or not he has nerve damage in that hand. Because if he does, obviously that'd be a pretty big blow for a guy who plays along the defensive line, where, your hand strength is a pretty important thing.
Albert Breer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. Also over the weekend, word that Dez Bryant and the Cowboys are getting closer. What can you tell us about his contractual situation?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned this to you a couple of weeks ago. I mean, Jerry Jones is his reputation. Stephen Jones, they get deals done and they find a way to do it. And I think that it's pretty obvious the whole problem here over the last 5 months has been over trust, and I think the Cowboys were willing to come up to Dez's level as far as the average per year on whatever deal that they were going to wind up doing. The question was whether or not they were going to be willing to guarantee a lot of it. And so I think that's where it was on Jerry and on Stephen Jones and on Todd Williams, the contract negotiator there, to be creative and to find a way to protect the team where if Dez does go out and do something stupid or something happens off the field, like, type of thing they've been concerned about over the last 5 years, and the reason why they've watched over him as a hawk, the team's protected. And so that's kind of the gap that they've had to bridge. I don't think the average is going to be a problem. I think they're willing to get him up in that $14, $15, $16 million range. It's the guaranteed money and what kind of protection the team is going to have, and that's really what they've got to work through over the next week or so, leading into that July 15th deadline.
So, and we just showed for the radio audience and for your purposes to the TV audience the names of Justin Houston and Demaryius Thomas, who, along with Dez and JPP, are the only ones still sitting there with a franchise tag offer sitting on the table. What can you tell me about Houston and Thomas and the July 15th deadline that looms for both of them?
We'll start with Demaryius Thomas. They haven't been close. I think Demaryius Thomas, and rightfully so, wants to be paid at the top of the market. Here's the issue for the Broncos. Demaryius Thomas is going to be worth $14 million this year, right? I mean, he's playing with Peyton Manning. They're still in that win-now mode. They're bringing in a new head coach. Obviously, having a player like that's going to be helpful when you're putting a new offensive system in. But what's Demaryius Thomas going to be worth to the Broncos in 2016 and 2017? And if Brock Osweiler is your quarterback then, does it really make sense for you to have a $15 or $16 million a year receiver on the roster? I think that's where some of the problems been for the Broncos. And, as far as the decision-making goes here, I think they're willing to reward him. The question is, do you want to pay him like he's Larry Fitzgerald or Calvin Johnson if you don't have a quarterback like Peyton Manning to get him the ball? And so I think there's a good likelihood, at least at this point, that Demaryius Thomas winds up playing in 2015 on the franchise tag, and then we'll see what happens after that. As for Justin Houston, there's no question about his value to the Chiefs. The issue here is they're already paying Tom Bahali. They spent a first-round pick last year on Dee Ford. And, so that premium, it's the same issue with JPP. You're talking about a player who's proven himself, who's still very young, who that position is very, very expensive to fill. And when you've already got resources poured into that position the way the Chiefs do, it's hard to get up to the level where he's going to be paid like a Mario Williams. In fact, I've talked to some people around the league who think that some teams should offer the Chiefs 2 first-round picks or try and sign him to an offer sheet. He's that type of player. It's just when you're talking about the way the Chiefs' books work, it's a little difficult when you're already paying Tom Bahali and you've got Dee Ford on a first-rounder's contract to break the bank one more time and sink that amount of resources into one spot.
I'm on the phone with Albert Breer of NFL Network. I'm going to flip the idea, though, the theory that you just posited that the Broncos have with Demaryius Thomas, that if I am starting Brock Osweiler, wouldn't you want to have somebody like a target like Demaryius Thomas for him to make him successful right from the get-go? I mean, it's not like the Broncos are ever going to be really in rebuilding mode here. I mean, in a league where guys have come off the bench after learning behind a legend,
right.
we can tell some magic carpet ride stories about somebody like that. So why wouldn't they want to have Demaryius Thomas under contract for somebody like Osweiler?
Well, what's Demaryius Thomas going to look like when Peyton Manning's gone? That's the question. I mean, is he going to be Calvin Johnson or Larry Fitzgerald? We know he's very, very good. He was obviously a key weapon for Tim Tebow, but is he going to be 90 catches, 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns if Brock Osweiler's the quarterback? And I think that's part of the issue that you sort through. It's sometimes it's hard. And I remember covering, the Deion Branch situation. I think it was my first year covering the league. And, they sorted through that at the Patriots, where it was, hey, well, how much of his success is Tom Brady and how much of his success is just, him being a great player? And you have to sort through that. And, so that's part of the equation there, too. They've got Emmanuel Sanders at a much cheaper rate over the next 3 years. They just drafted Cody Latimer in the second round a year ago. They're expecting him to take a step forward. And so, I just think that you look at how much they've invested in players on the defensive side of the ball, what they're investing in Gary Kubiak. They've invested in a left tackle who's now hurt. Something's going to have to give somewhere. And, again, I think that the question becomes then, if you aren't going to have a passing game that's going to be in the top 5 in the league, or you are going to scale back the investment that you make in the passing game because Peyton Manning isn't your quarterback anymore, is it worth having that type of receiver on your roster? And you can see, look at, Calvin Johnson with the Lions and the rest of the roster wasn't right. Look at Larry Fitzgerald with the Cardinals when they were going through their quarterback issues after Kurt Warner retired. Sometimes it might not be the best thing to have that type of player on your roster if you don't have the quarterback to get him the ball.
Last question for you, Albert. How come everybody's wringing their hands over Russell Wilson not going to get re-signed by Seattle, and Andrew Luck is not signed either by the Colts, and nobody's batting an eyelash about that?
Because Andrew Luck's going to – you're going to have to crash a Brinks truck into Andrew Luck's house. Andrew Luck's going to get whatever Andrew Luck wants.
So then why not Russell Wilson?
Here's the thing, okay? I actually look at Russell Wilson a little bit like you look at Tom Brady in 2003 and 2004, where you look at the player and you say, okay, he's clutch, he's making all the throws, he's doing everything that you want him to do, everything that you're asking him to do, but he's got a great team around him. And so the question becomes, if you're going to pay him $20 million, $21 million, $22 million a year, is he the type of player who's going to be able to carry your team? Now, The Patriots wound up paying Tom Brady in 2005, and he became that type of player. It's easy to remember, or it's easy to forget that early in his career, some people saw him as a game manager, as a product of the system, or as a guy who was lifted up by the fact that he had a great defense, a great head coach, a great offensive coordinator. And it was only later that he really proved he was a quarterback capable of carrying a team. And that's where Russell Wilson is to me right now. He's got a lot of great elements around him. That's an all-time defense. He's got a great running back behind him. He's got an excellent head coach, a very, very well-put-together organization. The question then becomes, if you're going to pay him at that rate, is he capable of carrying your team? Because when you have a quarterback at $20, $21, $22 million on your books, you're going to be asking more of him because that's going to cost you a couple of good players on your team. You may be asking a little more of him to carry your team. Is he capable of that? That's the question you have to ask when you're talking about paying Russell Wilson at that rate.
Albert, great information. I never thought I'd say this to you. I have to let you go if I'm going to get to the hot dog guy on time at the bottom of this hour. Okay.
And I want you to get my answer, my question answered. Does the color analyst have any experience in the competition that he's offering commentary on?
You bet, Albert. You bet. I'm going to hit him. I'm going to hit him hard with that question.
Between the eyes, Rich.
All right, Albert. It's Albert Breer. At Albert Breer.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.